Welcome back. We're going to pick up where we left off after we have a word of prayer. Father in heaven, we ask for your presence as we begin this session of our seminar. We ask that you will bless us with the presence of your Holy Spirit, that you will give us clarity of thought, understanding. And Lord, I ask that you will bless all of those who will hear and watch these messages, that you will touch their hearts. They might see truly what is going to take place very, very soon. We thank you for hearing our prayer. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, we are in the subtitle, The Perspective of Daniel 11, verses 40 to 45. And as we ended, we were making some remarks about a group that is known as those who know their God and those of understanding. That's talking about the righteous. That's Daniel chapter 11, verse 32. And then we're told that that group that knows their God and their people of understanding, they fall by sword and flame, by captivity and plundering, which is what the papacy did during its period of dominion. This happened for how long? For days. And I'm sustaining that the word days should be qualified by 1,260 days. And I know that we shouldn't be adding to Scripture, but I gave you an example as we ended our last class where the word days in Isaiah chapter 24 is interpreted later on in Revelation chapter 20 as years. So if you just had Isaiah and it said days, you would know that it's 1,000 years. But with putting the two together, you know that days are 1,000 years. So here, what I'm saying is that days where the righteous fall by sword, by flame, by captivity, and by plundering refers to the same times the dividing of time, 1,260 days, 42 months. And then when the many days are about to finish, according to Revelation chapter 11, when the two witnesses were about to end their testimony, and by the way, the expression 42 months and 1,260 days are used in Revelation 11 there. So when those periods were about to come to an end, it says that an entity called the King of the South, which represents atheism, France, secularism, arose against the King of the North. Now, at the time of the end, when is the time of the end? We don't have time to get into all the details. The time of the end begins in 1798, when the little book of Daniel, the seal is taken off and knowledge is increased, knowledge of the prophecies of Daniel. And so you find that at the time of the end, actually more accurately, almost when the time of the end begins, it says the King of the South, which is a symbol of France, and by the way, we're going to cover this more fully in our last two presentations, attacks the King of the North and wounds the King of the North. The King of the South, once again, is France, where you have the origins of communism and secularism, etc. And, the King James Version translates that at the time of the end, the King of the South shall push at him. That doesn't capture the meaning of the word in Hebrew. Other versions translate better. The New International Version translates, shall engage him in battle. In other words, the King of the South against the King of the North. The New King James Version translates, shall attack him. So the King of the North the South is going to attack the King of the North. The New American Standard Bible translates, shall collide with him. In other words, the King of the South is going to rise against the King of the North. And the New Century Version translates, shall fight a battle with him. By the way, that's a description of the deadly wound. It's the same word that is used in Daniel 8:4 for the ram that is goring its enemies with its horns. In other words, this is a violent attack of the king of the south against the king of the north. The king of the north is the papacy, and the king of the south represents France, that gives the papacy its deadly wound. Are you following me? Now, we'll deal with this more fully later, but I want you to see the general picture. But then what happens after this deadly wound, at the time of the end, 1798, after 4 days the righteous have suffered persecution, is the king of the north going to recover his power? Yes. The king of the north then recovered from its wound. You can read this in Daniel 11, beginning with verse 40. And he's going to rise like a mighty storm to flood and overflow. The word overflow in the Old Testament almost always refers to an overflowing river. So is the river going to flow again? Yeah. Absolutely. And it is going to go over all its banks. It's going to conquer everything it finds in its way. That is synonymous with the healing of the deadly wound in Revelation chapter 13. And this is going to bring about a time of trouble for God's people. Is that the second period of persecution that is described in the book of Revelation? Is there going to be another time of trouble, another persecution? Absolutely. However, at the height of the king of the north's conquest and flooding, Michael is going to stand up. Who is Michael? Jesus. Christ is going to stand up. He's going to stand up to defend his people. And what's going to happen to the king of the north? It says in verse 45, he shall come to his end with none to help him. What happened to his helpers? They turned against him. Are you seeing the picture? Different symbols are used, different language. But Ellen White also uses different language. But we need to see the pattern. So once again, the pattern here is very clear. The pattern is that 4 days, which I believe refers to the same as times the dividing of time, 1,260 days, 42 months. During those days, it says very clearly here that God's people, those who know their God, those of understanding, fell. They were persecuted by the sword, the flame, by captivity and plundering, which are the very methods that the papacy used against the faithful. And then, when the 2 witnesses are about to finish their testimony, at the end of the times the dividing of time, at the end of the 42 months or 1,260 days, you can read this in Revelation chapter 11, it says that the king of the south was going to attack the king of the north. What nation attacked the papacy at the end of its career in 1798? It was France. That's right. That's the deadly wound. But then it says that the king of the north recovers and it overflows. It conquers everything in its way. It looks like it's going to gain the victory. In fact, notice Daniel 11 and verse 44. This is the final crisis. It's the second stage of persecution. Daniel 11 verse 44 tells us that the king of the north has conquered everything in his path. The only group that he has not been able to conquer is those who are in Jerusalem, spiritual Jerusalem, which is the church. Notice Daniel chapter 11 and verse 44. It says, but tidings of the north and the east. By the way, that's a loud cry that comes from heaven. Shall trouble him, shall trouble the king of the north. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury. Is that the same as the dragon being enraged with the woman, making war against the remnant of her seed? Yes. It says, shall go forth with great fury to what? To destroy and utterly to destroy or make away many. That's the time of Jacob's trouble. That's the time when the multitudes are like raging waters, like we read in Great Controversy. They're about to execute the death decree. But then what's going to happen? Verse 45 says, the king of the north, which is the papacy, shall come to his end with none to help him. Because the kings and the daughters and the multitudes withdraw their support. There's no one to help him. And that's the reason why in Isaiah 47, it says, in one day, widowhood and loss of children were come. Widowhood because she no longer has her lovers, and the loss of children because her daughters also turn against her. Are you with me? So is Daniel 11 parallel to Daniel 2, Daniel 7, Revelation 12, Revelation 13, and Revelation 17? Absolutely. And we'll unpack this much, much further when we have our final two presentations tomorrow afternoon. Now, let's notice here, it's in the middle of my page, it does not take much of an imagination to discern the link between Daniel 11 and Revelation 12, 13, and 17. So let's review the composite picture of Revelation 12, 13, and 17. Stage 1 is when the waters flow for time times dividing of time, when the waters are persecuting God's people. Let's look at the perspective of Revelation 12 first. Revelation 12, 6 and 13 to 15. A seven-headed, ten-horned dragon spewed flood water out of one mouth for 1,260 days, or times in the dividing of time, with the intention of drowning the woman. That's the perspective of Revelation 12. Now, Revelation 13, 5 and 7. A seven-headed, ten-horned beast from the sea persecuted the saints and ruled with an iron fist for how long? 42 months. What about Daniel 11? The king of the north persecuted those who know their God and those of understanding for 1,260 days. Are you seeing the picture? Now let's go to stage 2. The persecuting waters dried up at the end of the 42 months, or 1,260 days, or times in the dividing of time. Let's look at the perspective of Revelation 12. Toward the end of the 1,260 years, the dragon's persecuting flood waters were dried up by the earth. The pilgrims and others fled from the old world to the territory of the new to escape the persecuting waters. Persecution ceased shortly before the end of the 1,260 years. So are the waters dried up in Revelation 12? Yes. How about Revelation chapter 13? At the end of the 42 months in 1798, France, the king of the south, gave the seven-headed and ten-horned beast a what? A deadly wound. Is that the same as drying up of persecution? Absolutely. And persecution has ceased since then. What about the perspective of Daniel chapter 11? Daniel 11:40. When the many days were about to finish, at the beginning of the time of the end, that's 1798, the king of the south, France, attacked the king of the north, the papacy, and wounded him. And since then, he has been unable to persecute as in the past. Are you following me? Revelation, now let's go to stage 3. Revelation 12:17 tells us that after a period of respite from persecution, the same seven-headed and ten-horned dragon that persecuted the woman will be filled with rage against the remnant of the woman's seed, and a second and future period of persecution will ensue without any length of time specified. Correct? Is there going to be another period of persecution? Revelation 12:17 says yes. So are the waters going to flow again? Of course. Let's look at the perspective of Revelation 13:3 and 11-18. For a period, the sea beast will be out of commission with a deadly wound. However, the wound will be what? Healed. Are the waters going to flow again? Yes, the wound will be healed, and all the world will wonder after it. A deputy beast will rise from the earth and continue the persecuting work of the seven-headed and ten-horned dragon. So is there going to be persecution again? Are the waters going to flow again? Is the wound going to be healed? The healing of the wound is the same thing as the waters flowing again. Now, what about the perspective of Revelation 17? The harlot will once more sit on a seven-headed, ten-horned dragon beast, the waters of the Euphrates, for an unspecified time period. And during that period, she will stain her hands with the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus. Is she going to persecute again? Is the deadly wound going to be healed? Are the waters going to flow again? They most certainly are. What about the perspective of Daniel chapter 11? The king of the north recovers from its wound, rises like a mighty storm to flood and overflow its banks. According to Daniel 11, is the river going to flow again? Is there going to be persecution again? Yes. But then are the waters going to be dried up once and for all? Revelation 16:12. The waters of the Euphrates are what? Dried up. How does Daniel chapter 11 describe this? It says, the king of the north shall come to his end with none to help him. Clear. I mean, you don't have to be King Solomon to understand it. Or Albert Einstein. Or a rocket scientist. Once you look at all of these chapters as parallel, everything makes absolute sense. Now let's examine the four beasts and where they rise. The four beasts of Revelation 12, Revelation 13, 1 to 10, Revelation 13, 18, 11 to 18, and Revelation 17 rise in different places. You think it's important to take a look at where they rise from? Or do you think that John simply says, let's just put something? No. The place where they rise has importance and significance. Now, when the seven-headed dragon attempted to slay the man-child, who's the man-child? Christ. A sign was seen where? In heaven. Why a sign in heaven? Where'd the dragon come from? Who's the dragon? The dragon is Satan. Of course, he works through Rome, but the dragon is Satan. Where did he come from? There it says there early in the chapter. He came from heaven. So the sign is where? The sign is in heaven. Because the battle began between Christ and Satan where? In heaven. So the sign is seen in heaven. Now, the seven-headed beast of Revelation 13:1 arose from the sea. Why did it rise from the sea? Because it ruled in the heavily populated areas of Asia and Western Europe, where there's lots of people. Are you following? The seven-headed scarlet beast of Revelation 17, verse 8, will rise from the abyss, from the underworld. What is that? It is the realm of the what? Of the dead. I'm going to read you a verse in a moment. From whence the sea beast will resurrect from its what? Why does this beast of Revelation 17 come from the abyss? Why does it come from where the realm of the dead? Because it was mortally wounded. You say, well, how do you know that the word deep means the realm of the dead? Well, Romans 10, verse 7 helps us understand. Or who shall ascend into the deep? And now comes the explanation. That is to bring up Christ again from the dead. So where, by the way, it's translated the deep, but it's the same word, abyss, where this dragon beast comes from. So why does this dragon beast of Revelation 17 rise from the realm of the dead? Because it's describing the deadly wound. This dragon beast was wounded because the head did not spew out water. And so it comes from the grave. Now, let's look at the next paragraph. By way of analogy, according to Revelation 20, verse 1, Satan will be cast where? Into the abyss. Interesting. And will be restrained when he receives his what? Is Satan receiving a deadly wound? Yes. What is a deadly wound? The fact that he can't use the civil powers of the world anymore because they're all dead. Right? So by way of analogy, Revelation 20 verse 1 tells us that Satan will be cast into the abyss. By the way, the same word where the dragon comes from. And will be restrained when he receives his deadly wound at the second coming. Up to this point, he had been what? Free to carry on his work. However, during the millennium, he will not be able to use the civil rulers and their citizens to accomplish his purposes because they all will be dead. Let me ask you, what gave Satan power before the second coming? People. How much power does a king have without subjects? None. Satan's power resides in the fact that he's able to use people. But during the millennium, he'll be wounded. He'll be in captivity because he has no people. They are all dead. Is his wound going to be healed? Yes or no? Are the waters going to flow again? Yes, they are. Why? Because all of those, his followers, are going to resurrect from the dead. So why does this beast rise from the realm of the dead? Because this dragon beast sustained a deadly wound. Are you understanding me or not? Now, there's a fourth beast. This beast rises from the earth. Is there a significance in the fact that the beast rises from the earth? Of course. It rises in a sparsely populated area. So there's a reason why these beasts rise in different places. It's because the first, heaven, because it's going to describe the battle between Christ and Satan, where it started. Then the sea beast, because it rises where there's lots of people, Asia and Europe. The beast that rises from the abyss, the realm of the dead, because it had a deadly wound, and now it's resurrecting. And the fourth beast, the earth, because it's a densely populated area. See, details are important. Now let's address the next point. Are the seven heads seven popes? I don't hear anybody saying that now, but I want to give you an example of how we can get off track simply by imposing our own thoughts on the Bible instead of allowing the Bible to explain itself. Revelation 17 verse 10 tells us that the seven heads represent seven kings. However, the word kings in the Bible is interchangeable with what? Kingdoms. We know that. Let me give you two examples of that. The head of gold, God says to Nebuchadnezzar, you are the head of gold. But after you shall rise another kingdom. So Nebuchadnezzar has a kingdom, because after comes another kingdom. In Daniel chapter 7, it says that these four beasts, the lion, the bear, the leopard, and the dragon beast, these four beasts are four kings. But then a little later on in the chapter, it says, the fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom. Are you following me or not? So kings and kingdoms are interchangeable. So let's continue here. Thus the seven heads represent seven successive civil kingdoms that have ruled since Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon and have been persuaded by the harlot of false religion to impose her agenda and persecute those who do not comply. Now, when John Paul II was Pope, some scholars, even some notable Seventh-day Adventist scholars, believe that the seven heads of this dragon beast represented seven successive popes who had ruled at that point since 1929. They chose that date on the erroneous assumption that the papacy's deadly wound was healed in 1929. The papacy's wound was not healed in 1929, folks. We're going to get into that in a few moments. In 2005, when John Paul was Pope, some interpreted the five heads that had fallen since 1929 as the following popes. Pius XI, 1922 to 1939. Pius XII, 1939 to 1958. John 23, 1958 to 1963. Paul VI, 1963 to 1978. And John Paul I, who reigned just over a little month, in 1978. So they said, these are the 5 that have fallen since 1929. See, they're taking this from Revelation chapter 17. 5 are fallen. Now, according to this scenario, the head who was John Paul II. In other words, the 5 that had fallen were the previous 5. And the 6th head would be who? John Paul II, who ruled from 1978 to 2005. And from the perspective of those who are speculating, the one who is to come, the 7th, who would rule a short time, was Benedict XVI, who ruled from 2005 to 2013. However, Benedict resigned from the papal chair on February 28, 2013. So the present Pope, Francis I, would supposedly be number 8 in the series of popes since 1929. So Francis, in this view, is the last pope. Are you following me? So the speculation goes that Pope Francis will be the last pope, because Revelation 17:11 refers to an 8th. And Pope Francis is the 8th in the series of popes since 1929. It seems to work. So you say, it's gotta be because it seems to work. It fits. It's like trying to fit a square peg in a circle when you really look at it carefully. Now, you know that Pope Francis is probably hanging by a thread. So he better die quickly for this scenario to take place, because then there would be a 9th pope, and the whole theory would fall apart. So let's summarize this view. Pope Pius XI, 1922-1939, number 1. Number 2, Pius XII, 1939-1958. John 23, 1958-1963. Paul VI, 1963 to 1978. John Paul I, 1978. John Paul II, 1978-2005. Benedict XVI, 2005 to 2013. Francis I, 2013. And there's a question mark because he has not passed away yet. Clearly, this view can be discarded because Pope Francis is not one of the previous 7 as the prophecy requires. Prophecy says that the 8th is one of the 7. And Pope Francis is not one of the 7. So that alone would discard this idea. Now, furthermore, the 7 heads represent civil kingdoms, not individual popes within those kingdoms. Before the election of Francis, evangelicals and even some Adventists sensationalized a prophecy by Saint Malachi to the effect that the next pope would be the last, that he would be black. By the way, it doesn't mean that he was going to be African American. It means the black pope is the head of the Jesuit order. Okay? So he would be black, in other words, the head of the Jesuit order, and his name would be Petrus Romanus. Well, Pope Francis I is a Jesuit, but his name is not Petrus Romanus. All this speculation that for a time seemed to work simply detracts from the historicist framework of this prophecy. It's because they disconnect Revelation 17 from Revelation 13 and Revelation 12. So they have to come up with a novel idea of 7 popes and an 8th pope. Now, the fact is that this prophecy has nothing to do with individual popes. The 7 heads are not 7 individuals, but rather 7 kingdoms. All this speculation about the 7 heads being 7 popes should never have been proposed for the following reasons. I have 5 of them. Number 1, first, the dragon beast does not have 8 heads. all the way through, it has only 7 heads. And the 8th is described as one of the 7. So there's only 7. Second, such a view comes pretty close to setting specific dates for final prophetic events. In this scenario, the successor of Pope Benedict XVI would be the last pope. Is this not setting a definite time frame for end-time events? I would say so. Third, and most importantly, these speculative views sever Revelation 17 from the previous prophetic lines of Daniel 7, Revelation 12, and 13. As we have seen, Revelation 12, 13, and 17 are indissolubly linked. Ellen White understood the common thread between Revelation 12, 13, 14, and 17. Why does she include 14? Because it speaks about the beast, his image, and his mark, which is found in Revelation 13. Now, let me read the first part. Let's read the following statement by Ellen White. It's manuscript releases, volume 17, page 18. God has warned his people of the perils before them. She's talking about future events, right? John beholds the things which will be in the last days and sees a people working counter to God. And then she gives this recommendation. Read Revelation 12, 17. Remember that's the nutshell that there's going to be a second period of persecution when the wound heals. Read Revelation 12, 17. Revelation 14, 10 to 13. By the way, this speaks about the beast, his image, and his mark, which is the main theme of Revelation chapter 13. So she says, read Revelation 12, 17, 14, 10 to 13, and chapters 17 and 13. Is she connecting here Revelation 12, Revelation 13, Revelation 17? Yes, she is. And she adds Revelation 14 because it speaks about the beast, his image, and his mark. The fourth reason why these are not popes. The 7 heads of this dragon beast are said to be 7 mountains. And we know that the river originates there. In prophecy, mountains represent kingdoms, not individual rulers. Popes on the list above are actually not rulers of 7 distinct kingdoms, but rather leaders of the same kingdom. Correct? Finally, there is no historical or biblical evidence that 1929, other than an article in the San Francisco Chronicle, that 1929 should be chosen as the beginning date for the sequence of 7 heads. They arbitrarily choose 1929 because they say that's the date in which the deadly wound was healed. Revelation 13, 11 to 18 explicitly explains that the deadly wound will be healed by the United States in the future, not by Italy in the past. Have we covered that point enough? The healing of the wound is the restoration of the sword of civil power to the papacy by the United States, because it's the United States that makes the image of the beast, not Italy. Now, was the deadly wound healed in 1801? I'm pursuing things that usually are not touched upon when we, as Adventists. It is a little known fact in Adventist circles that a new pope was elected just 3.5 years after the deadly wound. So was the election of a new pope the healing of the deadly wound? That's the question. Not only was the new pope elected, but he was allowed also to retain possession of his Italian principality. Notice what historian Arthur Robert Pennington wrote. Napoleon felt that, as the large majority of the inhabitants of France knew no other form of faith than Romanism, it must become the established religion of the country. What a huge mistake Napoleon Bonaparte made. Accordingly, we find that he now began negotiations with the Pope, which issued in a concordat in July of 1801, whereby the Roman Catholic religion was once more established in France. He also left Pius in possession of his Italian principality. So Napoleon says, because most people in France are Catholics, we're going to allow the Pope to retain his principality and to ascend to the throne again. Does this mean that the deadly wound was healed in 1801? No. Having his principality, having his territory is not the healing of the wound. There are three things that show, or actually four things that show that this is not the healing of the deadly wound, because a new Pope is placed on the throne and this individual is allowed to retain his Italian principality. What are the four reasons why this is not the healing of the deadly wound? First, prophecy clearly teaches that the United States will be the power that will restore the sword to the papacy, not France. Right? Napoleon was talking about France. Second, even though the papacy retained its territory and principality, the nations of Europe that had supported her in the past wanted nothing to do with her. So when in 1801, when the Pope took his throne again, all of Europe wondered after the beast. Everyone worshiped the beast. Everyone received the mark of the beast. No. So was the wound healed? No, because when the wound heals, those things take place. Number three, the Concordat of 1801 did not encourage the nations of Europe to command all nations to worship the beast or to erect an image or to impose its mark, which the prophecy requires. And finally, the power of the papacy was severely restricted by the French government. Although the papacy was allowed to retain its territory and principality, it was subject to France. The state elected the bishops, paid the clergy, and required them to swear an oath of allegiance to the state. That doesn't sound like the Pope has been restored to full power. Now, another thing that is not very well known in Adventist circles is that the papacy suffered another wound in 1870. Let's pursue that. Another little known fact in Adventist circles is that the papacy received a further wound on September 20, 1870, when Emperor Victor Emmanuel II confiscated the Papal States. You know what the Papal States are? Italy used to be composed of a whole bunch of like little countries. They were called Papal States. You still have the remnants today, Tuscany, you have names of different areas of Italy. Those used to be under the control of the Pope. But listen carefully to what Victor Emmanuel II did. He confiscated the Papal States and united Italy, made it a united country. As a result, the papacy lost most of its territory, except for a handful of buildings in Vatican City. In protest, Pope Pius IX and his successors declared themselves prisoners of the Vatican, and no pope left Vatican City for the next 59 years. Now, during his pontificate of 46 years, this was maybe the longest reigning pope in the history of the Catholic Church. If he wasn't, he was close to being the longest. He alienated and angered the governments of Western Europe, and he angered the United States. The United States at this time was definitely a Protestant country, in the sense that it was a country filled with Protestants. Very few Catholics in comparison. He infuriated Protestants in the United States because he proclaimed the dogma of the Immaculate Conception. In other words, the Immaculate Conception, it was not the Immaculate Conception of Christ. It was the Immaculate Conception of Mary. Oh, and Protestants, they didn't like that. That Mary was conceived without original sin? Come on, they didn't believe that. He angered Protestants and many Catholics in Europe. He also published his syllabus of errors in which he railed against democratic governments and civil and religious liberty. Man, the nations were angry. By the way, that was in 1864. And he also alienated many of his own priests and religious leaders when he proclaimed the dogma of papal infallibility in 1870. So lots of things made him mad. And so the popes proclaimed themselves prisoners of the Vatican. They didn't leave for 59 years. Now let's go to the next section. Was the deadly wound healed in 1929? That's been the view of evangelists in the Adventist Church. And by the way, they misuse a statement. We cannot take texts out of context and use them because somebody will discover it and they'll make us look bad. Roman Catholic historian Donald Atwater, this is a Catholic, summarized the meaning of what occurred in 1801, 1870, and 1929. He's going to explain what happened in those 3 dates. Even though the papacy had the Vatican and its principality once again, it exerted very little political power between 1801 and 1870. Why did it exercise or exert very little political power from 1801 to 1870? Because its wound wasn't healed. If its wound had been healed, it would have had all of its power. Notice what he wrote. Very few nations wish to have any relations whatsoever with a what? This is not a religious person for Protestantism. This is a Catholic. Very few nations wish to have any relations whatsoever with a wounded and humiliated papacy. In 1870, the papacy suffered a further blow when Victor Emmanuel confiscated the papal states, including Vatican City, and formed the unified kingdom of Italy, what Italy is today. The Pope, in protest, declared himself under house arrest. And no Pope left the Vatican for the next 59 years. But on February 11, 1929, this is the date that Adventists say that wound was healed. On February 11, 1929, a historic event took place. A treaty was signed by Mussolini and Gaspari, which restored full political control of Vatican City to the papacy. Notice, not all of Italy, just little Vatican City. In part, the treaty provides for the de jure, that means by law, and the de facto, in other words, in fact, international sovereignty of the Holy See with its absolutely and sole jurisdiction over a state called the City of the Vatican, and guarantees its freedom and independence. The person of the Pope is inviolable and sacred, and cardinals enjoy the honors of princes of royal blood, and wherever resident in Rome are Vatican citizens. Whoever lives in Rome is a Vatican citizen. Certain other ecclesiastics residing outside the city are given immunities. The Vatican and Italy have ordinary diplomatic relations. The Vatican City is therefore a permanently neutral and inviolable territory. So what did the Pope recover in 1929? Vatican City. Not all of Italy, not even all of Rome, just Vatican City. Now, Adventist writers and evangelists have made much of the year 1929, claiming that the Italian government healed the deadly wound that was given to the papacy by France in 1798. However, in all honesty, was the deadly wound given by France in 1798, healed by Italy in 1929? There are several persuasive reasons why it is not accurate to say that the wound given by France in 1798 was healed by Italy in 1929. Now come the reasons. First, the concordat that was signed, this is an important point. The concordat or agreement that was signed between the papacy and the Italian government in 1929 healed the wound that Italy gave the papacy in 1870, not the one that France gave it in 1798. The quotation that is used, healing the wound, is not talking about the wound of 1798. It's talking about the wound of 1870. And we're going to see that when we read the article that appeared in the San Francisco Chronicle. Now, second, the prophecy of Revelation 13, 11 to 18 makes crystal clear that the United States, not Italy, will be the nation that will heal the deadly wound. Even more significantly, in the aftermath of 1929, the whole world did not marvel after the papacy. An image was not made of it and to it, and its mark was not enforced on pain of death. So how could the wound be healed? Which Revelation says that when the wound heals, the image will have been raised and the mark will be enforced. How could that happen in 1929 if none of these things that are described here took place? Where then is the question? Did Adventists get the idea that the wound was healed in 1929? The answer is found in an article that appeared in the San Francisco Chronicle the very day that the 1929 Concordat was signed. We have to be very careful about taking items in the newspaper and inserting them in the Bible. Uriah Smith did that with the king of the south. Oh, the king of the north, he says, that's Turkey. We have to be very careful about taking the news and inserting. And people do that all the time with what's happening politically in the United States. They say things that really are wishful thinking. But really, and many people read tabloids that exaggerate things and add things that are not there. We have to look out at the newspaper in the light of what the Bible says. Not inject in the Bible what the newspaper says. That's the proper way of doing it. Now, let's talk about that article that appeared in the San Francisco Chronicle. In large type, the title was, Vatican Again at Peace with Italy After Long Quarrel. When did the long quarrel start? 1870. 59 years. In smaller type appeared the words, heal the wound of many years. Oh, that raises immediately say, heal the wound. That has to be referring to Revelation 13. Now, the part of the article that was most significant to Adventists was this. And I read from the article. The Roman question tonight was a thing of the past, and the Vatican was at peace with Italy. The formal accomplishment of this today was the exchange of the signatures in the historic palace of St. John Lateran by two noteworthy plenipotentiaries, Cardinal Gaspari for Pope Pius XI and Premier Mussolini for King Victor Emmanuel III. And now, here comes the key part. In affixing the autographs to the memorable document, in other words, when both of these signed the memorable documents, healing the wound which has festered since 1870. Is it honest to use what the San Francisco Chronicle says to say that the wound of 1798 is being healed? Never do evangelists include this part. They simply stop where it says, healing the wound, ... We have to be accurate. So once again, in affixing the autographs to the memorable document, healing the wound which has festered since 1870. Extreme cordiality was displayed on both sides. San Francisco Chronicle, February 11, 1929, page 1. I guess it was the most important news. It's on page 1. The article in the San Francisco Chronicle makes it abundantly clear that the wound that was healed in 1929 was not the one the papacy received in 1798, but rather the one that it was given in 1870. Now, don't get me wrong. What happened in 1929 was very significant. Would you agree that it was? Could we say that maybe the first step in the healing of the wound took place? I would say the first step. I would be willing to say that. The recovery of temporal sovereignty by the papacy was an important occurrence. We might go so far as to say that the wound of the papacy began to heal in that day, but the wound was not healed on that day. Does this make sense? Now, let's quickly go to the next section before time runs out. Some people believe that the first two heads of the seven-headed beast are Egypt and Assyria. By the way, they believe that there's 8 heads once again. Some have suggested that Egypt and Assyria must be the first 2 heads of the dragon of Revelation 17, because they were notorious persecutors of God's people. They also conclude that the dragon has 8 heads, because the prophecy speaks of an 8th. However, the chapter consistently refers to 7 heads, not 8. Some who hold this view give the following order of kingdoms. First head Egypt, second head Assyria, third head Babylon, fourth head Medes and Persians, fifth head Greece, sixth head Roman Empire, seventh head Papal Rome during the 1260 years, head number 8, Papal Rome healed from its deadly wound. It seems to work, but it passes up the United States of America as one of the heads. The problem with this view is that Egypt and Assyria are not found in any of the previous prophetic chains. They're not in Daniel 2, not in Daniel 7, not in Revelation 12, not in Revelation 13, and not in Revelation 17. Daniel 8 begins with the Medes and Persians. The first kingdom, of course, begins with Babylon. The next kingdom begins with the Medes and Persians. Daniel 11 begins with Persia. Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon is known as the Neo-Babylonian Empire because it was intended to be a continuation. Nebuchadnezzar had the idea of continuing the Babylon that existed at the Tower of Babel. And you know that the fountainhead of all theological error has its origin at the Tower of Babel. Because from there, they were spread out over the whole earth. And that's the reason why, for example, Roman Catholics use a rosary. You know what the rosary is? The beads, you know. Hail Mary, Mother of God, etc. But do you know the Muslims also use a rosary? And so do the Buddhists use a rosary? Where did it come from? It came originally from the Tower of Babel. So the Tower of Babel transfers all of its heresies to Babylon. And Babylon continues all of those heresies and spreads them over the whole earth. So were you able to follow what we studied? So are we supposed to include Egypt and Assyria? No. Does 1929 heal the deadly wound? No. We're to look for a different fulfillment to Revelation 17. We have to connect Revelation 17 with Revelation 12 and Revelation chapter 13. And then the prophecies make perfect sense. Is it clear? Yes. Praise the Lord. We'll come back after lunch and we will pick up where we left off. Is the beast from the abyss in Revelation 11 one of the 7?